Maribel Kane watched her husband, Harlan, collapse for the last time as the shovel came crashing down on his head. She heard the sickening crunch of bones snapping like dry twigs. The three robbers, Sloan, Griggs, and Teller, were panting like wild animals, their eyes red with frustration. They had torn the house apart, flipped over furniture, shredded mattresses, smashed cabinets, but still, there was no sign of the gold. "Where is it?" Teller roared. Harlan said nothing, and then he never had the chance to speak again. Their fury turned to Maribel. They dragged her onto the porch, wrapped a rope around her neck, and tied it to a wooden beam that had been rotting since last winter. Sloan kicked the chair out from under her feet, and Maribel felt the world shrink into a single line, thin as a final breath. The air turned into knives. Her neck snapped tight. Darkness closed in. The beam gave a sharp crack. It broke. Maribel fell onto the porch, slamming hard against the floor. Her throat burned like fire, but she was still alive. In the chaos, she crawled back inside, her trembling hands brushing against an old wooden chest under the table. She clutched it and ran into the darkness, leaving a long, smeared trail of blood from her neck and legs. The three men roared and gave chase. Maribel tore through the night like a spirit dragged out of hell, until her legs went numb, her arms dropped limp, and she collapsed at the gate of Jonas Mercer's farm, the solitary veteran who lived on land so desolate even the wind dared not touch it. The darkness closed behind her and a new fate began to unfold. Jonas Mercer was sitting alone by his unfinished forge, when the sound of something crashing outside split the silence like a bolt of thunder in the dead of night. The horse in the stable let out a long, sharp neigh, and the wind shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of blood. He rose to his feet, grabbed the old Winchester rifle that had followed him through 2 years of war, and stepped out onto the porch with the silence of a man long familiar with death. Under the pale moonlight, Maribel Kane lay curled up near the gate. A dark bruise ringed her neck, the imprint of the rope still stark against her skin, her breath barely there. Beside her, a blood-stained wooden chest. Jonas knelt down and touched her neck warm. Still alive. He lifted her in arms that had carried many dying brothers in arms. Maribel let out a faint moan, like someone who had brushed too close to death. Jonas pushed open the door and carried her inside, laying her gently on the wooden table. He pressed a clean cloth to her neck before opening an old army medical kit. "Can you hear me?" Jonas asked, his voice rough from years of speaking to no one but horses and the wind. Maribel opened her eyes for a brief moment and managed only one raspy, broken word. "They are coming." Jonas understood instantly. This was no accident. This was no petty robbery. This was a hunt. He heard the distant sound of hooves, steady, vicious, 3 riders following the trail of blood. There was no time to think. Jonas pulled back the rug beside the fireplace, revealing a steel trapdoor he had built himself after the war. It led to his shelter, a space that held memories, weapons, and all the things he had once tried to bury from the world. "Get in," he whispered, carrying Maribel down the wooden steps. The shelter was tight, but sealed and safe. He propped her against a water barrel and handed her a small pistol. "Stay quiet down here," Jonas said, locking eyes with her. "Let me take care of the rest." Maribel nodded faintly, fear trembling in her gaze. But behind it, the unshakable will of someone who had been hanged and still clung to life. Jonas shut the trapdoor, pulled the rug back over it, and stood still in the darkened house. He blew out the oil lamp. The room fell into a cold, earthen silence, as deep as a grave. The hoofbeats grew louder, the sound of drunken voices, cruel laughter, whistling through clenched teeth. The 3 men were coming. Jonas gripped his rifle, then let it go. He did not need a gun to hunt these animals. He needed darkness. The forge, the iron rods, the chains, the shards of metal, all of it turned into traps in the hands of a war veteran who had once walked out of hell. Jonas stood there, caught between the last 2 heartbeats of a peaceful life, ready to face the man who had hanged an innocent woman. And tonight, the darkness chose to stand with him. The wind shifted just as the 3 robbers rode into the yard, bringing with them the stench of sweat, cheap liquor, and bloodlust tainting the quiet land Jonas Mercer had kept undisturbed for years. Sloan, the tallest, with shoulders broad as a stable door, jumped down first. Griggs followed, slower, his eyes darting around like he was always searching for something to break. Teller came last, holding a swaying lantern, its light flickering over the wet trail of blood Maribel had left behind. She ran this way, Sloane growled. And the rancher's hiding her. No doubt about it, Teller said, his voice rough, filled with both tension and violence. Jonas stood still in the darkness of the house. He did not breathe loud. He did not move. The forge still radiated a faint heat, casting a weak red glow over scattered metal. But the shadows swallowed everything whole. The door was hit hard. "Hey! Open up!" Griggs barked, his voice soaked in alcohol. Jonas gave no answer. Another strike and the door burst open. They stormed into the pitch-black house, muttering curses when their eyes met nothing but shadows. "Where's the rancher?" Teller backed up against the wall, lifting the lantern high. The firelight sliced across the room like a thin blade. They saw nothing, but Jonas saw them, every vein in their faces, every twitch, every breath. His eyes, long accustomed to the dark, read their every move. Sloane stepped deeper inside, the butt of his rifle sweeping the space. Griggs moved to the left, stepping over a floorboard that made the rug covering the trapdoor shudder slightly. Jonas clenched his teeth. Teller lingered near the door, his hands trembling despite his attempt to look menacing. They split up. That was their first mistake. Jonas moved like a shadow, slipping behind the forge. When Griggs turned his head, the lantern light caught the glowing iron rod Jonas had placed there earlier. Griggs squinted, trying to make it out. Jonas lunged, wrapping a forge chain around Griggs's neck, yanking him hard toward the horse butchering table. The sharp clash of metal echoed as Griggs gasped, legs flailing, unable to cry out. Teller turned back. "Griggs? Where the hell?" Jonas threw something across the room. A blacksmith's hammer clanged loudly in a far corner, drawing Teller's attention. He turned, raising the lantern to see. That was their second mistake. Sloane began to suspect something. "Wait, there's someone in." He never finished. Griggs, in his dying flail, knocked over a rack of tools. The clatter of falling steel shook the house. Sloane jerked his rifle up and rushed toward the noise. Teller stepped back, struggling to steady the lantern. But all they found was a room swallowed in a terrifying silence. Jonas was there in the dark, not as a man on the run, but as a wolf, waiting for the strike. And those three animals had just stepped into its territory. In the thick darkness, Jonas Mercer did not move like a man. He moved like something born of iron, fire, and pure survival. The lingering heat from the forge shimmered against the walls, making the house seem as if it were breathing, trembling in anticipation of the raw violence about to unfold, violence unlike anything this land had seen. Sloane moved deeper in, his rifle sweeping through the dark. "What the hell is this silence? Griggs? Teller?" No reply. Only the faint ticking sound of a hot iron cooling on the forge. Jonas assessed the scene. Griggs dying, behind the coal bin. Teller near the door, still holding the lantern, shaking like a dry leaf. Sloane the biggest, the most dangerous, coming right toward him. Jonas made his choice. Sloane passed in front of a dusty fabric curtain. A breeze shifted no wind from outside, but the motion of Jonas moving. One heartbeat later, the blacksmith chain whipped around Sloane's neck, pulled tight. The sound of metal grinding into flesh was haunting. Sloane bucked back with the force of a bull, dragging Jonas half a meter across the floor. But Jonas had wrestled with things heavier than men. He looped the chain around a support beam and yanked it hard. Sloane bent forward just as Jonas spun and drove his knee straight into the man's face. Sloane dropped. Teller barely had time to scream, "Jonas Mercer." You. Jonas cut him off with a blow from a blacksmith's bar, knocking him sideways. The lantern crashed to the floor, snuffing out the light. Darkness swallowed everything, leaving only the steady, heavy footsteps of Jonas. Teller crawled backward into a corner, fumbling for a gun in blind panic. "Tu late." Jonas grabbed his collar and hauled him up like a sack of feed. In the glow of the dying embers, Teller's face lit red like a man already standing beneath the gallows. She, where is she?" Teller whimpered. "I should be asking you that," Jonas said. His voice so low, even the dark seemed to hold its breath. He shoved Teller's face close to the glowing iron, close enough for the heat to blister his skin. Teller screamed, trembling, and spilled everything. Someone in town, said Harlan had gold, said he was bragging about it. We did not know the girl would be there. We just wanted the gold, just the gold." Jonas gripped his collar tighter. "And you hanged her." Teller broke down, sobbing and sniveling, collapsing to the floor. Jonas said nothing. Teller, seizing the moment Jonas let go, reached desperately for the knife in his boot, but Jonas had already seen it coming. As the blade flashed, Jonas twisted and kicked Teller's hand. The knife flew across the room. Jonas picked up a fallen gun and fired one clean shot. Teller hit the ground, silent. The room settled into the soft crackling of the forge once more. Jonas stood over 3 bodies, 2 lifeless, one with only a few breaths left. The firelight reflected in eyes that had already seen far too much of the world's darkness. But the night was not over. Below the floor, Maribel was still gasping through a throat burned and bruised. And Jonas knew. The violence was just the opening act to a deeper truth, waiting to rise with the red glow of dawn. I am truly grateful for your presence here. If this story brought back a memory of red dust afternoons, or the echo of hooves in your chest, then subscribe to my channel, so that each day we can sit together again, and I will tell you another story from the Old West. Jonas dragged Teller's body outside, leaving behind the smell of hot metal in a house steeped in darkness. He shut the door, walked to the rug beside the fireplace, and opened the hatch. The lantern light spilled down, casting a glow on Maribel Kane's face, her neck bruised, eyes half open, lips cracked from thirst and fear. "It is over," Jonas said, his voice low, tired, but steady. Are they dead?" "2 of them. One is gasping out his last breaths in the yard, but no one else will come looking for you tonight." Maribel trembled. The chest, the one I brought." Jonas nodded. "It is here." The old wooden chest sat on the table, smeared with blood and dust from the road. Jonas lifted the lid. There was no gold inside, no jewels, just a handful of small things. An embroidered handkerchief, a birthday card yellowed with time, a broken pen, a wedding photo, smudged with water, a silver necklace, its inscription worn smooth. Maribel looked at it, then broke into sobs, the kind of crying that felt like it carried every last breath she had left. "Harlan," he once joked. "At the saloon," she choked out. He said, "I hid gold for my wife. He just wanted people to think he could give me something good." She clutched the wedding photo so tightly her knuckles turned white. And that one joke killed him. Jonas stood still. A harmless boast from a man who wanted to seem like a good husband had opened the gates of hell. Harlan did not deserve to die for a joke, Jonas said, eyes fixed on the firelight. Maribel shook her head. "No, but life has never been fair." Jonas said nothing more. He stood and walked out to the stable to clean up the robber's trail. As he shifted a pile of scattered straw, the trained eyes of a man who had walked through battlefields caught something out of place, a stone beneath the stall, sitting just a bit off. Jonas knelt, lit his lantern, and pulled the stone aside. Beneath the fresh dirt was a wooden lid. He dug a little more and uncovered a large chest, secured with an old but solid iron lock. His heart pounded. He heaved the chest out. It was heavy. Very heavy. Maribel stood at the stable door, watching the light, her neck still aching, but forcing herself upright. Jonas opened the lid. A flash of gold burst forth bright enough to bathe both of them in a color no one wanted to see in that moment. Gold. A lot of gold, cast into bars, wrapped in oilcloth, neatly arranged, planned, intentional. Maribel dropped to her knees. "Oh my God, Harlan," Jonas touched the edge of the chest, his expression growing grim. He really did hide it. He was not just boasting. Maribel clutched her chest, the pain so sharp she thought her heart might shatter again. "He did this for me. And this gift is what killed him." The night wind moved through the stable, carrying the scent of grass, of soil, and a grief that had no shape left. Jonas looked at Maribel from the shadows. "This does not belong to those men," he said. "But maybe it should not belong to anyone else tonight either." Maribel nodded, tears hot against the rope-burned skin of her throat. "Jonas, I do not want the gold," she said, her voice shaking like someone worn thin by death. "I just want peace." In the sting of yellow lantern light, Jonas understood. Gold is not something to be kept. It is something to be buried so the past can stay where it belongs. And when the sun rises, they would have to choose to do just that. Together. The night wind finally faded as Jonas and Maribel returned to the small house. The fireplace had burned down to a thin thread of light, and the entire room was wrapped in the kind of silence only those who have brushed against death can understand. Maribel sat at the table, a cloth wrapped around her neck, her chest rising and falling with painful breaths. Though Jonas had bandaged her, the marks from the rope still burned red, etched deep like the bite of a wild beast into her fate. But it was not the pain in her throat that made her tremble, it was the truth that had been revealed, that blinding chest of gold. Jonas placed a cup of warm water in her hands. "Drink. Your throat is still hurting." Maribel gave a faint, cracked laugh, the kind that sounded like old wood splitting apart. "The pain in my neck is easier than the one in my heart, Jonas." Jonas said nothing. He sat across from her, eyes on the fire, where the glowing coals pulsed and dimmed with the breath of the house. "Harlan saved for 3 years," Maribel said, her voice small, like a confession. "Every winter, he took extra jobs. Every summer, he sold horses. Every dollar was for me. And then," she gripped the cup tightly, her head lowered, "and then one joke killed him." Jonas looked at her. No words could soften that kind of pain. Meaningless deaths had haunted Jonas all his life on the battlefield. Men died because of a wrong order, a careless moment, a foolish rumor. Here, it was because of an offhand comment in a saloon. "You did nothing wrong," Jonas said gently. "But I carried that chest," Maribel whispered. "I ran into the night with it. I thought it was gold, the only life I had left. But I was wrong. It was just memories, and memories almost got me killed again." She touched the burn on her neck. "Jonas, I am tired. I do not want gold. I do not want to run. I just want it to end." Jonas lowered his head, fingers tapping lightly on the table, as if speaking to his own darkness. "Ending it does not mean running," he said. "It means choosing what is right, even when it weighs more than the past." Maribel looked up, her eyes red from crying. "What is right to who, Jonas? Harlan? The law? Or right for the woman who was hanged on her own front porch?" Jonas took a deep breath. "Right for you." Maribel stared at him for a long moment. In her eyes, pain and exhaustion blended into something that looked like resignation, but also a faint glimmer Jonas was not yet ready to call hope. The little house fell quiet once more, until Jonas stood up and placed more wood on the fire. The flames rose, casting a warm orange glow across Maribel's face. "Get some sleep," Jonas said. "Tomorrow morning, we will decide the fate of that chest." Maribel nodded, clutching the cloth around her neck like she was holding on to the last thread of life. "Jonas, thank you for pulling me down from death a second time." Jonas turned his face away, but his voice softened. "The living suffer more than the dead, Maribel. But if someone stands beside you, the pain is easier to breathe through." Outside, the dawn was still far off, but inside that little house, darkness was no longer the only thing that lived there. Dawn rose with a pale yellow light, the kind that was not warm enough to chase away the long night, but still bright enough to show everything that had been lost. A thin layer of mist blanketed the Mercer Valley, like a burial shroud for things no one wanted to speak of again. Jonas tied Harlan Kane's body to a small wooden cart. There was no funeral, no friends, no preacher, only Maribel standing beside it, clutching the scarf at her throat as if letting go would send her collapsing into the dirt. "Are you sure?" Jonas asked. Maribel said nothing. She simply nodded, a strange kind of firm nod for someone who had just lost everything. They made their way up the northern hill, where the wind blew harder, where the ground was tough but still soft enough for a grave. Harlan had liked this spot, Maribel had said, because it looked out over the whole valley. A place where the light always came late, but never broke its promise. As Jonas shoveled the first bites of earth, the air grew still, as if the land itself held its breath. Every heavy thrust of the spade did more than break the soil, it tore open another wound in Maribel. "He just wanted to be impressive," Maribel said quietly. Harlan thought if he bragged a little, people would respect him more. He was not a bad man, just foolish. Jonas paused, leaning on the shovel. "No one deserves to die for being foolish." Maribel gave a bitter smile. When the grave was deep enough, Jonas lowered Harlan in. Maribel stepped closer, her hands trembling, but her eyes never leaving her husband. "Harlan," she whispered, "if you had known what your little joke would cause, maybe you would have stayed quiet that night." She knelt and placed the embroidered handkerchief, one of the mementos from the wooden chest, on Harlan's chest. "I forgive you," she said, her voice breaking but not weak. "Not because you deserve it, but because I cannot carry the anger anymore." The wind picked up, as if carrying those words far away. Jonas began to cover the grave. One layer after another. No one spoke. The final shovels sounded like the closing of a coffin lid. When the mound was level, Maribel stood, the wind tugging her hair and dress to one side. She looked small, fragile, but there was a hardness in her now that did not belong to someone who had just been hanged the night before. I do not know where to go," Maribel said, eyes still on the grave. "My house is gone. The town will talk. I do not want to carry that chest, and I cannot go back to where too much has died." Jonas looked at her from the side, where the morning light caught the mark on her throat. A woman who had survived but had no home, no anchor, and nothing left but a pain bigger than her shadow. "This ranch is big," Jonas said slowly. "No one lives here but me. You can stay, at least until you find where you are meant to go." Maribel turned to him, eyes red but shining. "You are sure? I bring a lot of trouble." "Jonas Metiagase. You bring life. After a night like that, that is enough." The wind blew stronger, rustling a few blades of grass atop the grave. Two people stood side by side in that pale morning, one who had just lost a husband, the other who had long lost faith in the world, and both of them knew something had changed. Not because of the gold, not because of the past, but because, for the first time in many years, they were no longer standing alone on that hill. That afternoon, the sunlight had softened, no longer carrying the harsh burn of the Wild West. The wind swept through the Mercer Ranch as if blowing away the last traces of the long night before. But inside the wooden house, the air remained heavy, as if shadows still clung to every corner. Jonas and Maribel stood before the chest of gold in the middle of the room. Sunlight slipped through the window, reflecting off each gold bar, making them shine so brightly it almost felt cruel. Maribel looked at them like she was staring down an enemy. "This is not a blessing," she said slowly. "It is a curse." Jonas nodded. He felt the same. "It killed Harlan. It killed his whole life," Maribel said, eyes red. "And it nearly killed me." She sniffled, hand trembling as she touched the edge of the chest. But it was not greed that made her shake, it was memory. "Harlan hid it to surprise me. He wanted to give me a better future. But he did not understand. A better future is not bought with gold. It is built with peace." Jonas looked at her face, tired, but resilient. "What do you want to do with it, Maribel?" She stood straight, took a deep breath, like she was about to make the most important decision of her life. "Bury it again, somewhere no one knows. Not to hide it, but to forget it." Jonas asked no more. To him, those words were the truest thing she could have said. They carried the chest to the back hill, where the land was untouched, no hoofprints, no footprints. Jonas carried the shovel. Maribel walked behind, slow but steady, her throat still sore, but for the first time in days, her heart felt a little lighter. They dug deeper than Harlan's grave. When the chest reached the bottom of the pit, Maribel knelt close. "Harlan," she whispered, "I am leaving your gift here, not because I am forgetting you, but because I want to keep living." The wind picked up, soft, like a blessing from far away. Jonas covered the hole. Each shovel of dirt did more than bury the gold, it buried the ghosts of a night they would never forget. When the earth was smooth again, Maribel stood still for a long moment. "Jonas, I do not know what I will do next, but I know one thing." Jonas looked at her, calm and quiet, like a man who had lost more than he ever dared admit. "What is that?" "That I want to stay, at least for a while, not because I am afraid of what is out there." She glanced toward the horizon, "But because I do not want to leave the only place where I can still breathe." Jonas took a deep breath, like he had just heard something sacred. "There is work to be done here," he said. "If you want to stay, this place can be your home. Not temporary, not in hiding, a real home." Maribel looked at him. In her tear-swollen eyes, for the first time, there was a new kind of light, faint, but real. "Thank you, Jonas," She gave him a small smile, soft as morning light. Not for saving me, but for letting me stand instead of fall. They walked back toward the house, leaving behind an unmarked patch of earth, no signs, no names, nothing to tell what lay beneath. The gold was buried, but they were saved. Not by treasure, not by luck, but because two shattered people chose to stand beside each other when the world tried its hardest to break them. My friend, love does not come during the easy days. It finds us in the dark in blood, in loss, when we can barely stand. And courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to move forward while your heart is trembling. When two people dare to hold each other's hand in the moment the world wants to knock them down, love becomes a fire small, but bright enough to light a life once forgotten in the dark. Above all, I truly hope that wherever you are, you find happiness and peace, even in the hardest of places. I love you all, dear listeners of Wild West Storytelling. Let me know what this story meant to you. Leave a comment below. Type the number 6 if you liked this story. And do not forget to subscribe for more gripping tales from the Wild West.